What if I told you that behind the ancient stone walls of London's most iconic fortress lies a history steeped in betrayal, murder, and restless ghosts? What if I told you that this single building, admired by tourists every day, has seen more blood spilled, more screams echo, and more secrets buried than almost any other place in England? Welcome to the Tower of London, once a royal palace, later a dungeon of despair, and always a place where death walked hand in hand with power. Our story begins nearly 1,000 years ago. It was 1066, the year William the Conqueror invaded England, determined to establish dominance over the people he had just conquered. William ordered the construction of a mighty fortress on the banks of the River Thames. This was no ordinary castle. This was meant to intimidate, to terrify, to remind the English who truly ruled them. Stone by stone, the White Tower rose into the sky, casting its shadow over London. And from that moment on, the tower was destined to become not only a symbol of power, but also a place of dread. Over the centuries, kings and queens expanded the tower, transforming it into a palace, an armory, a treasury, and most famously, a prison. It was said that if you were taken through Traitor's Gate, the great water entrance beneath the fortress walls, you would never leave alive. The tower became synonymous with doom. It wasn't just common criminals who were locked inside. Nobles, princes, even queens of England found themselves imprisoned here, awaiting their fate. But the tower's dark legacy was not written by walls alone. It was written in blood. The heads of traitors spiked on London Bridge, the whispered prayers of condemned souls echoing through its halls, and the restless spirits of those who died too young, or too brutally, said to still walk its corridors today. From the tragic death of the princes in the tower to the haunting execution of Anne Boleyn, the tower is a place where history and horror blur. Some say its stones have absorbed centuries of pain, releasing it in the form of ghostly apparitions. Others believe that the tower is cursed, destined to forever carry the memories of its victims. This is not just the story of a fortress. This is the story of ambition, betrayal, and the price of power. And it begins right here, with the blood-soaked foundations of the Tower of London. If the walls of the tower could speak, they would whisper the cries of the condemned carried across the Thames. Imagine yourself on a small boat, gliding toward the looming fortress, the water lapping against its cold stone. Ahead, a dark arch yawns open, the infamous Traitor's Gate. Once you passed beneath that arch, hope was left behind. For centuries, this gate was the entry point for some of the most famous prisoners in English history. Sir Thomas More, the brilliant scholar who defied King Henry VIII, entered here before being executed on Tower Hill. Queen Anne Boleyn, Henry's second wife, accused of treason and adultery, made the same grim journey. So too did Lady Jane Grey, the 9 Days Queen, whose brief reign ended in betrayal and tragedy. The gate was not merely a passage, it was a ritual. The condemned would see the tower rising above them, its walls blotting out the sky, and know that they were entering a place where power crushed all who defied it. For the guards who escorted them, the journey was routine. For the prisoner, it was the beginning of the end. The tower's cells varied depending on who you were. Nobles might be confined in relatively comfortable lodgings, with tapestries and servants, but commoners were thrown into damp, rat-infested dungeons. Yet no matter the room, all shared the same fear, the uncertainty of when the axe would fall, or whether torture awaited. And torture was no stranger here. Instruments like the rack, designed to stretch the human body beyond its limits, were housed in the tower. Prisoners would scream until their joints popped, until bones dislocated, until truth, or whatever confession their captors wanted, spilled from their lips. It wasn't justice. It was power-enforcing obedience. But perhaps the most chilling thought is this. Not everyone who entered Traitor's Gate was guilty. Many were victims of politics, pawns in the ruthless chess game of monarchy. One day you might be a trusted advisor, a beloved queen, or even an heir to the throne. The next, you were branded a traitor, dragged beneath the arch, and vanished into the tower's maw. Today, tourists peer down at the waterlogged entrance, imagining the dread that once filled its stones. Yet some swear that on quiet nights, you can still hear the splash of unseen oars, the murmur of desperate prayers, and the faint echoes of chains rattling against a boat's side. The tower had many faces, a palace, a prison, a place of execution. But it was also a stage where the greatest dramas of power and betrayal played out. And the next act in our story involves two young boys whose mysterious fate still haunts history. Few stories from the Tower of London are as chilling or as tragic as that of the two young princes. Their disappearance remains one of history's darkest mysteries, and the tower itself is forever bound to their fate. The year was 1483. King Edward IV had died unexpectedly, leaving the throne to his 12-year-old son, Edward Veith. Too young to rule, Edward was placed under the protection of his uncle, Richard, Duke of Gloucester. Alongside him was his younger brother, Richard, Duke of York, just 9 years old. The two boys were escorted to the Tower of London, supposedly for their own safety until Edward's coronation. But that coronation would never come. The princes were lodged in the royal apartments. At first they were seen playing in the gardens, waving from the windows. But slowly, sightings grew rare. Then one day they vanished completely. Rumors spread like wildfire. Some whispered that Richard, their uncle, had them murdered so he could seize the throne for himself, becoming Richard III. Others believed rival nobles arranged their deaths, ensuring the boys could never challenge for power. Still others claimed the children were smuggled out in secret, living their lives in hiding. But the truth, it was buried beneath the stones of the tower. Centuries later, in 1634, workmen repairing a staircase inside the fortress discovered a wooden chest. Inside were two small skeletons. Were these the remains of the lost princes? Many believed so, and the bones were interred at Westminster Abbey. Yet no conclusive proof has ever been found. Modern science has never been able to confirm their identity with certainty. The mystery of the princes lingers not only in history books, but, some say, in the tower itself. Guards have reported the sounds of children's laughter echoing through the halls late at night. Visitors have claimed to see two small figures dressed in nightgowns, clutching each other's hands, their faces pale and sorrowful. They appear for a moment, then fade into the stone walls, as though swallowed by the very place that doomed them. The disappearance of Edward V and his brother turned the tower from a prison into a tomb of innocence. It showed that not even children, royal blood or not, were safe from the ruthless struggle for the crown, and it cemented the tower's reputations as a place where betrayal was as common as breath, and mercy was as fleeting as morning mist. The princes were not the first victims of ambition, nor would they be the last. Soon, the tower would bear witness to the fall of queens, women who had once worn crowns, only to meet the executioner's blade. If the Tower of London is remembered for blood and betrayal, then its most haunting echoes belong to the queens who walked within its walls. Power, love, and politics brought them to greatness. But at the Tower, those same forces condemned them to death. Among them none is more famous than Anne Boleyn, the fiery second wife of King Henry VIII. Once adored by the king, Anne's charm and wit helped spark England's break with Rome. She gave Henry a daughter, the future Elizabeth Throwood, but she failed to give him the son he craved. Soon the very passion that raised her to the throne turned into suspicion, then hatred, accused of adultery, treason, and even witchcraft. Anne was brought through traitors' gate in 1536. She was imprisoned in royal apartments that had once been hers as queen. On the morning of her execution, she walked calmly to the scaffold within the tower grounds. Dressed in a dark gown, she addressed the crowd, asking God to save the king. Then, with a single stroke from a French swordsman, her head fell. Witnesses claimed her lips moved in silent prayer, even after death. Today, many say her spirit lingers, drifting along the corridors, head tucked beneath her arm. But Anne was not the only queen to meet her end here. Catherine Howard, Henry's fifth wife and cousin to Anne, was accused of unfaithfulness as well. Barely a teenager when she caught the king's eye, Catherine's flirtations proved fatal. In 1542, she was dragged to the tower, terrified and hysterical, screaming for mercy. Unlike Anne, she was no orator. She begged, cried, and fought against her fate. Yet the axe fell all the same. Lady Jane Grey, remembered as the 9 Days, Queen, also found herself a prisoner of the Tower, thrust onto the throne, against her will by ambitious nobles. She was barely 16 when she was crowned. Less than 2 weeks later, she was deposed. Locked in the Tower with her young husband, Jane awaited death. In 1554, she climbed the scaffold, speaking words of faith, before bowing to the executioner's blade. To this day, her pale ghost is said to wander the battlements, a sorrowful figure cloaked in twilight. These women, once crowned and celebrated, ended their lives in the tower's shadow. Their fates remind us of a brutal truth. In the ruthless game of monarchy, queens were as vulnerable as pawns, but the tower's most enduring legacy is not only in death. It is in the restless spirits said to haunt its halls, their stories whispered from generation to generation. The Tower of London is more than a fortress of stone. It is a fortress of memory, a place where the past refuses to stay buried, where centuries of blood and betrayal are said to echo still in the form of restless spirits. Step inside at night, and you may find that history is not just remembered. It is alive. Perhaps the most famous ghost is Anne Boleyn. Countless witnesses claim to have seen her drifting along the Tower Green or inside the chapel of St. Peter ad Vincula, where her body lies. Some describe her carrying her head beneath her arm. Others see her as a shadowed figure, gliding silently, her eyes fixed on some invisible horizon. Guards, hardened soldiers by trade, have admitted to fleeing their posts after encountering her spectral presence. The two young princes are also said to wander the tower, their tragic story etched into its very stones. Children's laughter has been heard in the dead of night, only to fade into sobs. Some visitors report seeing two pale boys holding hands, appearing lost and afraid, before vanishing into the walls. Their innocence lingers like a wound that will never heal. Catherine Howard, Henry VIII's doomed fifth queen, is said to haunt the tower as well. Legend tells that on the night before her execution, she broke free from her guards and ran screaming through the corridors, begging Henry for mercy. Today, her spirit is often heard in the same passageway, her shrieks echoing as if she is still pleading for her life. Then there are darker presences. Guards have reported feeling icy hands clutching at them, hearing phantom footsteps behind them, only to turn and find no one there. Some speak of the mysterious bear of the tower, a ghostly apparition of a great beast once, kept in the menagerie centuries ago. When one guard tried to confront it, he was said to die of shock days later. Even the ravens of the tower are tied to its legend, kept within the grounds. They are said to protect the kingdom itself. A prophecy warns that if the ravens ever leave, the tower will crumble and the monarchy with it. And so they remain, their black wings a reminder that superstition and history here are forever entwined. The Tower of London is more than a tourist attraction. It is a living chronicle of fear, ambition, and death. It is a place where kings rose, queens fell, and prisoners vanished into the dark. And perhaps when you stand within its walls, you are never truly alone. The past watches you. The ghosts remember, enjoying this journey, into the Tower of London's darkest secrets. Tap that subscribe button to uncover more chilling stories from history's most haunted places. If this tale gave you chills, give it a like, and tell me in the comments, do you believe the tower is truly haunted, or just haunted by its bloody past?